They were the men who made Hollywood tremble, not just with their talent, but with something far more whispered about, far more taboo. In the golden age of cinema, when masculinity was sculpted in shadows and lit by studio lights, some stars became legends not for the roles they played, but for the rumors they never denied. Behind the velvet curtains and cigar smoke, in the hushed voices of co-stars and crew, certain names carried weight, literal and figurative. They were admired, envied, and feared. Some embraced the myth. Others were trapped by it. Because being well endowed in Hollywood was not just a blessing. For some, it became a curse. Today, we revisit the tragic lives of stars whose physicality was a fascination and sometimes a prison. Let's begin. Shall I now proceed with the first character profile? I suggest starting with Errol Flynn, the iconic swashbuckler whose reputation off-screen became more dangerous than any sword he wielded on screen. Let's begin our journey with the man whose name became synonymous with charm, danger, and scandal whispered in dressing rooms across Hollywood. Errol Flynn, 1. The golden idol of adventure. Born in 1909 in Tasmania, Errol Flynn became the very definition of swashbuckling masculinity. By the late 1930s, he had risen to global fame with roles like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. Women swooned, men wanted to be him, and studios built empires around his roguish grin and athletic grace. He moved like a panther, spoke with a devil's tongue, and on screen, he was untouchable. But off-screen, there was something else. Something that people wouldn't say aloud, but everyone seemed to know. 2. A prison of desire. Flynn's off-screen life was a vortex of rumors, lawsuits, and affairs. He became so notorious that the phrase, "in like Flynn," entered the American lexicon, a wink to both his charm and his alleged anatomical endowment. Yet behind the bravado was a deeply unstable man. Accused of statutory rape in 1942 and later acquitted, Flynn became a caricature of excess, alcohol, morphine, sex, and destruction. Friends said he often used his reputation as armor, but in private, he was adrift. He couldn't stop performing, one confidant recalled, even when the cameras weren't rolling. A quiet, rotten end. Errol Flynn died in 1959 at age 50 in Vancouver. His liver was so damaged that the coroner said it looked like that of an 85-year-old man. He died in the arms of a teenage girl. There was no grand tribute, no Hollywood mourning. The hero of adventure films had slipped away, bloated and forgotten, far from the glory of Sherwood Forest. The ghost in the mirror. One director once said, "Flynn was cursed by the image we gave him, and the one he believed." His so-called gift became a golden cage, trapping him in a role he could never escape. Behind the bravado, behind the gossip and women and winks, was a broken man looking for something no legend could give him. Let's move on to a name that evokes laughter, but also legends. A man whose fame came not only from comedy, but from a reputation that followed him like a shadow long after the curtains closed. Milton Berle. 1. Mr. Television, the man who made America laugh. Milton Berle was born in 1908 in New York City and became one of the earliest superstars of American television. By the late 1940s, he was known as Mr. Television, hosting Texaco Star Theater and captivating millions each week. His style was loud, fast, and chaotic, and audiences loved it. But even as he shaped American comedy, there was another story being told, behind the scenes, in locker rooms, backstage green rooms, and late-night parties. A story that had nothing to do with jokes and everything to do with anatomy. The burden of the joke. Berle's reputation for being well-endowed wasn't whispered, it was shouted. Fellow comedians like Johnny Carson, Howard Stern, and even Sammy Davis Jr. repeated stories of backstage showdowns that became legendary. Berle leaned into the myth, joking about it on stage, and even reportedly proving it in private moments to win bets or silence doubters. But what began as a myth, he embraced slowly became a mask. "People stopped seeing me," Berle once said. "They only saw the punchline." Underneath the showbiz exterior was a man who'd grown tired of being defined by something he never asked to be famous for. A death in the quiet. Milton Berle died in 2002 at the age of 93. By then, most of the world had moved on. He passed away in Los Angeles, surrounded by a few loved ones, but largely forgotten by the generation he helped raise on laughter. His name no longer lit up marquees. His legacy, strangely, had been reduced to rumors and running gags. 4. The legend he laughed at and lived with. Comedian Alan Zweibel once said, "Milton told dirty jokes to make people laugh, but I think he was hiding something deeper, like most of us clowns." Berle's myth became a monument to ego, virility, and performance. But inside, he was still that boy from Harlem who wanted to be loved for more than a laugh or a rumor. Marlon Brando, 1. The rebel who changed the screen forever. Born in 1924 in Omaha, Nebraska, Marlon Brando exploded into Hollywood like a force of nature. From A Streetcar Named Desire to On the Waterfront, he was more than just a performer. He was a revolution. The way he moved, the way he mumbled, the way he made silence louder than shouting, it shook the world. But what stirred even more whispers was his undeniable sexual energy. Co-stars spoke in awe. Lovers, both male and female, hinted at experiences that bordered on myth. There were rumors, persistent, graphic, and rarely denied, about what made Brando's presence so magnetic. 2. A heart devoured by chaos. Brando's private life was a battlefield. He fathered over a dozen children with multiple women. He had passionate affairs with men, including claims of intimacy with Richard Pryor. But for all his lovers, Brando was perpetually alone. His son Christian was imprisoned for murder. His daughter Cheyenne took her own life. Brando spiraled into depression, isolating himself on a private island, eating compulsively, speaking to no one. He once said, "If you want something from me, you'd better bring it with you, because I'm not coming out." His sexuality had once drawn the world to him. In the end, it was a wall. 3. The Island of Silence. Brando died in 2004 at the age of 80 in a Los Angeles hospital. There was no grand farewell, no cinematic tribute worthy of his myth. He had become a recluse, hidden behind sunglasses and pain, his voice a whisper of what it once was. The man who once commanded every room now faded quietly into the fog of forgotten giants. The volcano that burned itself out. One biographer wrote, "Brando's body was the first thing you noticed and the last thing he wanted you to. His allure, his size, his rumored gifts, they brought him attention, obsession, even worship. But in the end, they only masked the agony of a soul who never found peace. Not in love, not in fame, not in himself." Now we arrive at a man who rode in from the South, moustached, magnetic, and unashamedly masculine. He laughed louder than most, posed bolder than any, but in the end, the world saw only the image and forgot the man behind it. Bert Reynolds. 1. The sex symbol in a cowboy hat. Bert Reynolds was born in 1936 in Lansing, Michigan, but his swagger belonged to the Deep South. With breakout roles in films like Deliverance, Smokey and the Bandit, and Boogie Nights, he became the ultimate man's man, equal parts charm and danger. In 1972, he shocked the nation by posing nude for Cosmopolitan, reclining on a bearskin rug, mustache thick, grin wide, and nothing left to the imagination. That single photo turned him into an erotic icon. And the rumors? They spread like wildfire. For years, whispers of his generous physique followed him like a second shadow. And Reynolds? He didn't deny them. Not once. Trapped in a joke with no punchline. But the fame came with a cost. Reynolds often joked that the Cosmo spread ruined his acting career. "No one took me seriously after that," he admitted. Beneath the confident swagger was a man wrestling with profound insecurity about his talent, his health, his loneliness, failed marriages, a broken engagement with Sally Field, and addiction to painkillers after a stunt injury left him a ghost of his former self. His own body, once worshipped, became a prison of chronic pain and surgeries. He said in an interview, "I spent most of my life chasing a version of me that never really existed." 3. The Final Exit and the Silence. Bert Reynolds passed away in 2018 at age 82. He died alone in a Florida hospital, clutching a photo of Sally Field. He had been working on a comeback role, one final shot at dignity. But Hollywood had already moved on. There was no parade, no thunderous applause, just a quiet statement. A man who once set hearts ablaze left with barely a flicker. A smile that hid the ache. Sally Field later confessed, "He was the love of my life, but he never really knew himself. He played a character even when we were alone." Reynolds was larger than life, in rumors, in roles, in body. But in the end, he was just a man who desperately wanted to be more than the punchline of his own legend. to a name that never fades, a face frozen in time. James Dean lived fast, died young, and left behind a myth so potent it still intoxicates Hollywood today. But beneath the brooding eyes and restless swagger was a young man teetering between desire and despair. James Dean. One, the rebel that time couldn't touch. James Dean was born in 1931 in Marion, Indiana, with just 3 major films, East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. He cemented himself as the ultimate icon of teenage angst and masculine fragility. He didn't walk, he drifted. He didn't act, he burned. Directors and co-stars described an energy that was hypnotic, sexual, and entirely uncontainable. Dean didn't chase fame, he seduced it. Rumors about his intimate life followed closely behind his rising stardom, affairs with both women and men, especially powerful male producers. Whispers about his physical gifts were passed through Hollywood's inner circles, murmured with awe, tinged with danger. 2. A body too restless for this world. Dean's private world was messy and volatile. Abandoned by his mother as a child and emotionally estranged from his father, he craved affection but rejected attachment. He drove motorcycles like he was being chased by ghosts. He drank in silence. He cried after sex. Friends said he oscillated between tenderness and fury, intimacy and withdrawal. Some lovers described him as electrifying, others as haunted. He didn't want to be touched, except when he did. And then it was desperate, one confidant recalled. His allure wasn't just in how he looked, but in how he seemed to ache from the inside out. A crash heard around the world. James Dean died in a high-speed car crash in 1955 at just 24 years old. The wreck twisted his body beyond recognition. His death stunned a nation. No final words, no last embrace, just the brutal silence of metal and asphalt. Hollywood held its breath, and a legend was born. The one who didn't grow old, didn't fade, didn't disappoint. 4. The Phantom Lover of a Lost Generation. A Hollywood biographer once wrote, James Dean's body was the last great secret of the Golden Age, something everyone wanted, but no one really owned. He was rumored to be many things, a lover to men and women, a submissive, a loner, a prince, a boy. Perhaps the truth doesn't matter anymore. What remains is the ache, the beautiful, terrible ache of someone who was too much, too fast, too soon. Now we turn to a man whose smile conquered studios, whose charm was the stuff of legends, and whose appetite for pleasure became as famous as any of his roles. But behind the slick exterior of Warren Beatty was a deeper question. What is a man left with when he's had everything? 1. The seducer of the silver screen. Born in 1937 in Richmond, Virginia, Warren Beatty didn't just enter Hollywood, he seduced it. With breakthrough roles in Splendor in the Grass and Bonnie and Clyde, he became the rare combination of actor, director, and producer, celebrated for both looks and brains. But no matter how many awards he won, it was his reputation off-screen that turned him into a modern myth. By the 1970s, Beatty was the most whispered-about man in Hollywood, rumored to have slept with over 12,000 women. Some gossiped about his stamina, others about his size. None denied his impact. Warren didn't walk into a room, one actress said. He arrived like a question mark no one could answer. 2. Addicted to the chase. For decades, Beatty avoided marriage, commitment, or anything that resembled stillness. He moved from woman to woman, Natalie Wood, Julie Christie, Diane Keaton, Madonna, leaving behind stories of sleepless nights and broken hearts. Yet for all the women, there were very few real connections. Insiders described him as emotionally elusive, hyper-controlling, and terrified of intimacy. One friend put it bluntly, Warren wasn't chasing sex, he was running from silence. And perhaps most tragically, Beatty often mistook desire for love, and in doing so, never found either. 3. A legend in retreat. Though Beatty eventually married Annette Bening in the 1990s and had children, his star had dimmed. Films flopped. The man once hailed as Hollywood's golden seducer became a relic in a world he no longer understood. By the 2010s, he was all but invisible, no longer the center of the party, just another man growing old, quietly in the shadow of his own legend. The echo of too much. A fellow actor once said, Warren was the kind of man women wanted until they realized he wasn't really there. For all the lovers, the roles, the rumors, Beatty remains a mystery. Was he the ultimate playboy? Or just a man who mistook admiration for affection? The legend endures. But the man, perhaps he was lost in the very image he created. Would you like to continue with another figure? Rock Hudson. 1. The perfect man, designed by the studio system. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in 1925, Rock Hudson was not discovered. He was sculpted. With towering height, broad shoulders, and a chiseled jaw, he became Universal's ultimate leading man in the 1950s and 60s. Films like Giant and Pillow Talk made him a household name. Audiences adored him. Women dreamed of him. And beneath it all was a reputation that quietly trailed him. Not just about his physique, but about what lay behind the veil. He was too perfect to be real, one actress whispered, perhaps because he wasn't allowed to be. A lie that became a life. Hudson was gay, but in an era when such truth could destroy a career, he lived in secrecy. The rumors spread, and the studios scrambled. A sham marriage was arranged. Public appearances were staged. Meanwhile, in private, he sought fleeting comfort in anonymous partners and whispered nights. Friends said his charm was genuine, but so was his loneliness. He lived in fear of being exposed. And yet, those who knew him intimately spoke not just of vulnerability, but of stunning physical presence. He was adored and utterly alone. Her 3. The death that shattered the silence. In 1985, Rock Hudson became the first major celebrity to die of AIDS. The world was stunned. Suddenly, the mask fell. He hadn't just been a movie star. He had been hiding a truth more human than any role he ever played. His death changed the public conversation around AIDS and outed him posthumously to a world that had never truly seen him. 4. The shadow he couldn't outrun. Elizabeth Taylor said it best. Rock was beautiful, not just outside but inside, but he was never allowed to be whole. His body made him a star. His silence made him a tragedy. In the end, Rock Hudson became a martyr of Hollywood's cruelty and a ghost who still lingers in its mirrored halls. Steve McQueen was the face of anti-establishment masculinity, but beneath the cool exterior was a life marked by fire, fury, and loss. 1. The King of Cool. Born in 1930 in Indiana, Steve McQueen became the embodiment of rugged independence. From The Great Escape to Bullitt and Papillon, he played loners who lived by their own code. His piercing blue eyes, gravelly voice, and lean, muscular body gave him an almost feral sexuality. Fans adored his danger. Women were drawn to it. And rumors about his physical endowment floated through casting rooms and studio corridors like smoke. Never confirmed, never denied. McQueen didn't talk about it. He didn't have to. 2. Anger, abandonment, and the war within. Behind the legend was a man tormented by abandonment. Raised in reform schools, beaten by stepfathers, McQueen spent his life chasing control. In racing, in stunts, in women. He was a notorious philanderer, with co-stars describing him as obsessive, animalistic, and emotionally unavailable. Drugs, alcohol, and jealous rages colored his private world. He could be charming and cruel in the same breath, a former lover confessed. His physical intensity masked a boy still bruised by childhood, still starving for affection he didn't know how to accept. 3. A star that burned out quietly. Steve McQueen died of cancer in 1980 at just 50. In the final months, he sought unproven treatments in Mexico, desperate to outrun the inevitable. The studios that once bowed to him offered no grand tribute. He was cremated, and his ashes scattered in the Pacific, as if the earth itself couldn't hold on to him. The man who ran from everything had finally stopped. 4. Too hard to love, too bright to forget. A co-star once said, Steve wasn't acting, he really was that man, but it came at a cost. His physical appeal, his raw sexuality, his whispered reputation, all were just armor. Underneath was a wounded soul, born into chaos and consumed by it. McQueen lived fast not because he loved life, but because he never trusted it would last. Now we turn to a man of thunder, whose voice rolled like a storm and whose presence was so commanding, even Elizabeth Taylor couldn't look away. But for all his brilliance, Richard Burton was a man undone by desire, drink, and his own myth. Richard Burton, the Welsh firebrand. Born in 1925 in a mining village in Wales, Richard Burton rose from coal dust to Shakespearean glory. With piercing eyes, a sonorous voice, and a lion-like presence, he became one of the most sought-after actors of the 1960s and 70s. Cleopatra, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Beckett, he made poetry sound dangerous. Women adored him. Men feared him. And behind the scenes, rumors bloomed. His lovers, and there were many, spoke of a physicality as intense as his rage, as overwhelming as his voice. Burton was not just magnetic, he was consuming. And number 2, addicted to passion, poisoned by love. Burton's personal life was a battlefield, most famously with Elizabeth Taylor. They married twice, divorced twice, drank oceans together, and scorched every room they entered. "We were like two monsters," Taylor once said. Burton was often violent, often drunk, and deeply insecure. He fought with directors, alienated friends, and destroyed his health in the process. He chased love with desperation, yet never believed he deserved it. His charisma was mythic, but so was his self-loathing. "He needed to be admired," said a friend, but he didn't believe anyone truly could. 3. A death without applause. Burton died in 1984 at age 58 of a cerebral hemorrhage. He had been reduced to stage plays and television films in his final years, far from the Hollywood spotlight. His funeral in Switzerland was small. Taylor was not invited. The world that once bowed at his feet barely whispered as he vanished into the earth. 4. The man who roared until he cracked. A colleague once said, "Richard Burton, most powerful man in any room, and the most fragile." His body, his voice, his fury, all legendary. But inside was a boy from the Welsh valleys, trying to scream loud enough to be heard. In the end, he was heard, but he was never understood. Now we enter darker territory, a name synonymous with excess, scandal, and the adult film underworld. John Holmes was more than a man. He was a myth. But behind that myth was a life consumed by addiction, exploitation, and a need that was never satisfied. John Holmes, one, the legend of the screen and beyond. Born in 1944 in rural Ohio, John Holmes entered Hollywood through the back door, literally. In the 1970s, he became the most famous adult film star in the world. His on-screen presence was staggering, but what made him legendary was his rumored 13-inch endowment. The name Johnny Wad became a cultural joke, a punchline, a fascination. Even mainstream stars whispered his name. Studio execs passed around his tapes. He was the underground icon that even A-listers couldn't stop watching. 2. Trapped by his own image. Holmes's fame was inseparable from his body, and that body became a prison. He was paid to perform, to satisfy, to surrender himself on camera again and again. Behind the scenes, he descended into cocaine and heroin addiction. He became erratic, paranoid, desperate. Friends said he would do anything for drugs, including pimping, theft, and worse. He was manipulated by producers, feared by coworkers, and clung to by users who only wanted a piece of the legend. There was no John anymore, one former partner said. Only the myth, and it was killing him. 3. Murder and silence. In 1981, Holmes was implicated in the grisly Wonderland murders, a drug-fueled massacre in Los Angeles. Though never convicted of the killings, he was found guilty in the court of public opinion. His career collapsed. His body, once so celebrated, became riddled with disease. He died of AIDS-related complications in 1988 at age 43, penniless and forgotten. No funeral, no headlines, just silence. 4. The weight of a legend no one should carry. A former director once said, Holmes was a man cursed with a body the world wouldn't let him escape. He was built into a god, then torn apart for being human. His size gave him fame, but it also made him a target, an object, a ghost. In the end, no one knew who John Holmes really was, including John himself. Now we turn to a star who defined 1950s teen idol perfection. Blonde, tanned, all-American. But Tab Hunter's smile masked a life lived in fear, shaped by whispers, and nearly destroyed by a truth he was never allowed to speak. Tab Hunter. 1. Hollywood's golden boy. Born Arthur Andrew Kelm in 1931, Tab Hunter was the studio system's answer to every teenage girl's dream. With icy blue eyes, golden hair, and a body carved for the big screen, he was marketed as the perfect boy next door. Films like Damn Yankees and Battle Cry made him a box office sensation. Magazine covers, fan clubs, and screaming crowds followed wherever he went. His on-screen charm and effortless beauty were matched by a physicality that co-stars quietly remarked on. In private circles, rumors spread. He was not only handsome, he was generously built. But in 1950s Hollywood, another rumor was even more dangerous. 2. The secret he couldn't speak. Tab Hunter was gay, and in a time when being outed meant career death, he lived in constant fear. He dated women publicly while conducting secret relationships with men behind closed doors. He endured blackmail, threats from gossip columnists, and pressure from studios to keep up the charade. I was living two lives, he would later confess, one for the camera, one for myself. Even his most intimate relationships were shrouded in caution. His body made him a symbol of desire, but his truth made him a target. 3. The long fade into the shadows. As Hollywood shifted in the 1960s, Tab's fame faded. The roles stopped coming. He retreated from the spotlight, living a quieter life with his longtime partner, Alan Glaser. It wasn't until decades later that he came out publicly through a memoir and documentary. He died in 2018, just 3 days shy of his 87th birthday. No scandal, no spectacle, just peace at last. 4. The price of perfection. Tab was trapped in a world that adored his body but would have destroyed his soul, a friend once said. For years, he was desired but never truly known. In the end, his greatest performance wasn't in film. It was surviving an industry that demanded silence in exchange for success. Our next figure is a man who sprinted from the gritty streets of the Bronx into the beds of Hollywood's elite. Tony Curtis was electric, erotic, and endlessly restless. He lived for pleasure, but pleasure rarely stayed. Tony Curtis won the Bronx charmer turned silver screen star. Born Bernard Schwartz in 1925, Tony Curtis rose from poverty and neglect to become one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. With jet black hair, dazzling eyes, and a sculpted physique, he dripped charm in every frame. From Some Like It Hot to the sweet smell of success, he proved he could make audiences laugh, cry, and blush. His sexual appeal was undeniable. Fans adored him. Actresses competed for his attention. Off-screen, rumors of his impressive attributes swirled in studio lounges and dressing rooms. Tony was hung like a horse and knew it, one former flame reportedly said, and Curtis didn't mind the legend. In fact, he cultivated it. 2. The addict of desire. Curtis married 6 times, including to Janet Leigh, with whom he had actress daughter Jamie Lee Curtis. But fidelity was never in his vocabulary. He once estimated he had slept with over 1,000 women, including Marilyn Monroe and Natalie Wood. But behind the pleasure was a man clawing away at emptiness. He became addicted to cocaine, heroin, and the high of being desired. Friends described a man who could be loving one minute, cruel the next. He mistook attention for affection, a colleague said, and the two aren't the same. He was forever chasing the validation he never got as a boy from the Bronx. Fading into eccentricity, Curtis's later years were strange. He underwent plastic surgeries, wore wigs, and retreated into art and isolation. By the 1990s, the industry had all but forgotten him. When he died in 2010 at the age of 85, there was no massive outpouring from Hollywood, only scattered tributes and a family long fractured. The man once worshipped for his looks was gone and barely mentioned. The mirror was never enough. Tony Curtis once said, "I was the handsomest man in Hollywood, and it nearly killed me." His body brought him everything he thought he wanted: fame, lovers, legend. But it never filled the void. In the end, he wasn't just running from his past, he was running from himself. Now we come to a man who didn't have to try to be cool. He simply was. Robert Mitchum didn't chase stardom or sex or scandal. They chased him. But beneath the lazy drawl and heavy-lidded stare was a man too numb to care and too complex to forget. 1. The reluctant star of Dangerous Men. Born in 1917 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Robert Mitchum stumbled into acting almost by accident. With a towering frame, sleepy eyes, and an unshakable swagger, he became the quintessential noir anti-hero in films like Out of the Past and The Night of the Hunter. He didn't smile unless he meant it, and he didn't seduce. He commanded. Women were drawn to his quiet intensity, his size, and the aura of forbidden knowledge he carried like smoke. Rumors of his sexual prowess followed him his entire career. Never confirmed, never denied, just like Mitchum liked it. An outsider to fame and himself. Mitchum hated Hollywood. He called it a circus of phonies and refused to play the game. He was arrested for marijuana in 1948, shrugged it off, and continued working. He drank heavily, womanized compulsively, and distanced himself from everyone, including his wife, whom he remained married to despite countless affairs. He wasn't cruel, one actress recalled, but he was unreachable, even in bed. Mitchum lived like a man who had seen the end of the world and decided it wasn't worth fighting for. His magnetism was effortless, but so was his detachment. 3. The quiet disappearance. Mitchum died in 1997, just days before Jimmy Stewart, in a time when most of his peers were long gone or forgotten. There was no great mourning in the press, no lifetime achievement ceremony. He slipped away the same way he lived, without explanation, without apology. 4. The man who shrugged at immortality. A fellow actor once said, Mitchum didn't act, he was. His body, his voice, his danger, they all seemed to emerge from some mythic American dream, and yet he never believed in any of it. Perhaps that's why he remains so mysterious. He didn't need fame. He didn't even need us. He just was. Now we step into the court of royalty, a man crowned the King of Hollywood, not by birthright, but by sheer force of presence. Clark Gable was the blueprint of masculinity for a generation, but behind the charm and grin was a legacy both mighty and deeply haunted. Clark Gable. 1. The king who owned the screen. Born in 1901 in Cadiz, Ohio, Clark Gable rose from oil fields and poverty to become the face of Hollywood's golden age. With Gone with the Wind, he secured immortality. His square jaw, commanding posture, and rugged elegance made him the archetype of the American leading man. Women swooned, men imitated. And beneath the tuxedo, rumors swirled for decades. Gable was, in private, as physically overwhelming as he was on screen. Co-stars spoke in hushed tones of his presence, not just his magnetism, but his raw, masculine energy. He was the kind of man others never forgot, for more reasons than one. Haunted by love and guilt. Gable's off-screen life was full of tragedy. He was married 5 times, but it was his 3rd wife, Carole Lombard, who he truly loved. Her sudden death in a plane crash shattered him. He retreated into alcohol, reckless affairs, and dangerous hobbies. Friends said he could never recover, emotionally or spiritually. He carried an air of silent mourning that never quite lifted. Behind his public image as a virile titan was a man quietly crumbling under grief, guilt, and the weight of keeping up a legend he no longer believed in. A sudden, lonely exit. In 1960, just days after filming his final scenes for The Misfits with Marilyn Monroe, Gable suffered a massive heart attack. He died shortly after, at the age of 59. He left behind a pregnant wife and a Hollywood that had already begun to move on. There was a funeral, but no parade. The king was dead, and the castle had changed. 4. The crown that crushed its wearer. Marilyn Monroe once said, Gable had something no one else had, something you couldn't fake. But that something, that aura of strength and sexuality, became a cage. He was desired by millions, envied by men, and mythologized beyond recognition. But like many kings, Clark Gable died as he lived, admired, misunderstood, and utterly alone. Let's bring this journey to its final chapter and shift from the golden haze of old Hollywood into something darker, more modern, more visceral. Mickey Rourke was sex, swagger, and self-destruction incarnate. A man who once had it all, and then tore it all down with his bare hands. Mickey Rourke, the last dangerous star. Born in 1952 in Schenectady, New York, Mickey Rourke burst onto the screen in the 1980s with a smoldering presence that critics compared to Brando and Dean. In 9.5 weeks, Angel Heart and Barfly, he oozed sexual menace and broken poetry. Women desired him. Men feared him. His body, lean, hard, magnetic, seemed sculpted for sin. Off-screen, stories circulated of wild affairs, intense stamina, and an animal magnetism that no one could fake. He didn't care about image. He was the image. Dangerous, damaged, and desired. 2. Boxing, breakdown, and the spiral. But Rourke couldn't hold it together. Dissatisfied with Hollywood, he walked away in the 90s to pursue professional boxing, destroying his face and health in the process. Surgeries warped his appearance. His comeback attempts were scattered, interrupted by drug abuse, violent outbursts, and emotional collapse. I lost everything, he later admitted. The fame, the money, the women, my face, all gone. Yet even at his lowest, lovers and friends described him with awe, magnetic, unpredictable, and still somehow beautiful, even in ruin. He was addicted to pain, as if it was the only language he truly spoke. Resurrection and regret. Rourke made a brief, glorious comeback with The Wrestler in 2008, a performance so raw it was almost a confession. But the momentum didn't last. His choices grew erratic, his appearance ghost-like. Today, he lives alone with his dogs, speaking of missed chances, of love he squandered, and of a time when the world was at his feet, and he kicked it away. 4. A body that betrayed its maker. A director once said, Mickey Rourke walked into the room like sex and death had made a bet, and both lost. His body once gave him everything. Then it broke him. His tragedy isn't that he fell from grace. It's that he knew exactly what he was losing and let it go anyway.